You are listening to the Batflip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome to this episode of the Batflip Podcast. My name is Damian here with my co-host Matt, coming to you on a Monday this time instead of a Tuesday on October 4th, 2021. We're going to give you a breakdown of how the season wrapped up, where each division stands, or not stands, as it finished. A player from each team that kind of highlighted what we thought, the team meant, or team MVP, or who just impressed us the most from that team. And then we will do a preview of the two wildcard games, which is going to be from tomorrow night's the American League, and Wednesday night will be the National League. But before we jump into all that, how are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. My voice is not 100%. I went down to Louisiana. I went to the Auburn LSU game on Saturday, and that was a lot of fun. Auburn got the win for the first time down there in a long, long time. So I was loud and rambunctious on Saturday night, and that got me. I got my voice down a little bit, but I think it's good enough to do this episode tonight. And, it was a lot of fun, and I've been watching some baseball as well, and enjoying this last week of the season, and excited for the playoffs. I think it's going to be a fantastic postseason. A lot of good stories coming in, and ready to go.
Yeah, this past week was absolutely insane. So, we left you guys last time talking about how there could be a possibility of a 5-way tie for that second American League wildcard spot, and then also the NL West division battle was down between the Dodgers and the Giants to only a couple games there. Well, going into Sunday, there was still the possibility of a 4-way tie in the American League wildcard, and the possibility of a tie in the National League West. So it all came to a head pretty much on that Sunday. It was absolutely chaotic. And we'll go ahead and start with how the National League East ended up, and kind of work our way down to that American League picture to keep you guys guessing a little bit. But the Braves, we talked about, ended up winning this division by, what is it? It ended up being 6.5 games overall after they ended up sweeping that Phillies series. Who was a player from the Braves, since it's your team, that you kind of felt epitomized this Braves team this season?
Yeah, well, first off, the Braves, the first half of the season struggled a little bit, but you can't mention the Braves without mentioning what Ronald Acuna Jr. did for the first half. I do want to shout out him real quick, because he still was second on the team in wins above replacement, and he really kept them afloat as they struggled in the first half of the season. But this team wouldn't have gotten to the record they got at 88-73, winning that division, without the contributions that Austin Riley made this year. This guy just completely reinvented himself at the plate and took that step forward, breakout season all the way through. He put up a slash line of, the 303 average, which is insane for him, a 367 on base, and a 531 slugging percentage this year. Hit 33 home runs, 107 RBIs. It's good for a 135 WRC plus. And he put up over 4 wins above replacement, and what was a true breakout year for the young guy. In fact, his wins above replacement value on Baseball Reference was over 5. So the defensive metrics really disagreed with their how they analyzed his performance. In fact, Baseball Reference had him at like 10 defensive runs saved or something, which was really good. But you can't mention the Braves without what Austin Riley did. Had a fantastic season, and like I say, there is no way they would have been in the position they ended up in without him playing, as well as he did, coming down the stretch. So very, very, very good season for Austin Riley, and we'll see if he's able to continue in the future. But fantastic job by the Braves finishing off the division, and we'll see what they can do in the postseason.
Yeah, especially with Riley, he was a big question mark coming into the season about if he should even be up in the major league club as an everyday player. Some people were saying he should be in the minors. Some people said he should just be a bench player, and they shouldn't really, have to count on him. And he really stepped up, kind of taking over that everyday third baseman role after they really just didn't have many other options play great there. So it's a absolutely fantastic season for Austin Riley. It's been one of the really fun ones to watch, because you could always tell the potential was there. He just struggled just a little too much with making contact and just looked lost at the plate at times. And to really turn around and have a season like this, where in most other seasons he'd be a possible MVP candidate. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, and one other thing, you talk about that question mark. Before the season, we talked. We'll go into our predictions in a few minutes, but we talked about how we thought the Braves had a lot of question marks, but the ceiling was really high. At every place they had question marks. They weren't all going to work out, but if a couple of them did, they could end up having a really good season, and that's one of those question marks that it did work out, and that's something that really propelled them to have their 88-73 season they had. But moving on, we'll go through the rest of the NL East here. The Phillies finished second in the division, 6.5 games back. They went 82-80 this year, which that was their first winning season in a long time. So there was definitely some good things they did this year. But you look at the bullpen pitching and some of their starting rotation in the back end and bottom of their lineup. They just weren't a deep enough team to challenge and win this division, even though they got close this year. But who was a player for the Phillies that stood out to you and how they played this year?
It's going to seem more of like an obvious one. I mean, you could have mentioned guys like Ranger Suarez, who just didn't have as much volume as this guy, but that's Zach Wheeler. Came over from the Mets a couple years ago, and there was talk at the time, did he deserve the contract that he got? And everybody said his peripherals were always so good, and that he has another level in there. That can he unlock that another level, and can he stay healthy? Well, he pretty much did both of those this year. I mean, a career high 213 innings pitched, a career high in 10.42 strikeouts per nine, a career low of 1.94 walks per nine, and a slash line of 278 ERA, which is a career low. Fielded independent pitching of a 259, which is also a career low. An xFIP of 284. So his peripherals backed up what his actual ERA said, and a career high 7.3 WAR. For a good majority of the season, Zach Wheeler was the Cy Young favorite. Right there with Corbin Burns and Max Scherzer. But this other level that he kind of ticked up to this year, it's kind of what everybody thought he had that potential to be, just they never knew if he'd be able to unlock it. And at his age 31 season in Philadelphia, he proved them wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the thing that stood out to me with his season was that his strikeout rate jumped. He had been over the past couple years a guy who didn't walk a lot of guys. He had pretty good numbers, low ERAs, but the fact that he was able to turn from being a guy who had, last year he had six. It was a short season, but 6.7 strikeouts per nine. He jumped that up over 10 this year, which is the first time he's been over 9 in his career, outside of I guess 2014. But he barely touched 9. But yeah, he's a guy who really figured out the out pitch this year, and that took him from being a good pitcher who got the ball on the ground a lot last year to being a guy who not only was getting the ball on the ground a lot, not giving up a lot of hard contact, but also having really good, have been able to have that swing and miss stuff too, and get those strikeouts that just took him to another level. So, great season for Zach Wheeler. He was really the reason that the Phillies stayed in it till the end of the season. Without his contributions, they wouldn't have been. I mean, there were some other good contributors like you mentioned, Ranger Suarez, but the season Bryce Harper had was really good too. But uh, you know, really the reason that they took what appeared to be a step forward is that Zach Wheeler just put up a fantastic season. And honestly, you said what was a Cy Young favorite, and I do think Corbin Burns probably better for Cy Young, but there might be some voters who do go with Zach Wheeler because of the volume. Corbin Burns missed a little bit of time, and although Corbin Burns' value when he did pitch was so much greater that he should get the nod, in my opinion. There are going to be guys who like Wheeler's season better, so I wouldn't say it's clear cut that Wheeler doesn't have a shot at it still.
No, he absolutely has a shot. I just think he's kind of fallen off from the time, or maybe everybody just stepped their game up more from where they were, at the time. But absolutely great season for Wheeler. But we'll move over to the New York Mets right now, and another piece of news that came out today about the New York Mets is that their manager Luis Rojas had his option declined, which pretty much means that they are no longer going to have him as the manager of the Mets. They have offered to keep him in the organization in another role. They haven't specified what that is, but the New York Mets will have another manager, come next season. So just a little piece of news there, but the one player that we kind of thought that had a season that kind of surprised us when we started looking over these names for the Mets, and that was Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah, first off on the Mets, you look at the fact that they really collapsed in the second half of the season. And it wasn't all the manager's fault. They had a lot of injuries this year, including the guy I'm about to talk about. Um, missed a lot of time as well. Although he was really good when he did play. But there are a lot of issues there, a lot of injuries. Some guys underperformed, but there's not too much a manager can do about that. But with the collapse, that doesn't especially surprise me. Obviously Luis Rojas did a great job filling in, as he was never really the first choice for that job. But with Carlos Beltran's issues, relating to the scandal in Houston. Luis Rojas got kind of forced into that job, and didn't necessarily do badly, but it's not all his fault. But you look at the Mets, and Brandon Nimmo had a fantastic season. He played in just 92 games, like I said, because of some injuries, but he had a great season. Put up a 292 average, 401 on base percentage, at 437 slugging is just okay, but 137 WRC plus, 3.4 wins above replacement. He's actually a pretty good defensive center fielder, which he had never been in his career. He had been a center fielder, but not good defensively center. Only 8 home runs, but again, 92 games. But the big thing you look at with Brandon Nimmo is the fact that a 14% walk rate, that goes right along with his career so far. He's a guy who he's got fantastic on base skills, gets on base a ton, walks an absolute lot, and while still being able to hit for contact, he's not a great power hitter. But like I said, 8 home runs in 92 games. He can run into them. That's kind of a pace for like 15 or so on a full season. But he's a guy who was spectacular for them. A really kind of a classic leadoff hitter. So good job by Brandon Nimmo this year. When he played, it really helped the Mets. But of course, like I say, missing 92 games didn't help. A couple other guys to mention on that team as well. Jacob DeGrom, we talked about him a lot. Before his injuries piled up, but he was having a career year. And then Mark Stroman pitched really well this year too. But that's another guy. I believe he's a free agent, right?
Yeah, he is. He took the
So
qualifying offer last year,
yeah.
so
So
he can't receive the qualifying offer again this year either.
right. So he will not have a draft pick tied to him.
Yeah.
So Marcus Stroman's a guy who probably made himself a lot of money with the way he pitched this year. But yeah, you look at Brandon Nimmo, and he was a really good bright spot for the Mets on a really rough year, especially down the stretch for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned his defense. I just wanted to hit a little bit more on that. In his career, in 2020 in center field, he had a -5 defensive runs saved. In 2019, -2. He had +4 this year. And then you look at his UZR, which is another zone rating one. He had been a -2.8, -1.5, -1 or 4.1. He was a 2.8 this year. So he's really, turned into a solid defensive center fielder, and that's something that the Mets had already lacked. And already they had a bunch of corner outfielders, which Nimmo was to begin with. But allowing him to slide over to center, that finds more at bats for Dom Smith and possibly J.D. Davis if he plays some left field, Michael Conforto, and those guys aren't the greatest defensively. So if Nimmo could be serviceable in center field, that helps them at least for that. Helps out those corner defenders a little bit. But like you said, he's got to be able to stay healthy. If he does, he could be a really, really good player for the Mets.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, especially like you say, with his ability to play center this year, maybe that continues, and if it does, then they've got a really nice looking player there. But moving on, we've talked about the teams that were really the contenders in this division. But we can move on now to the Miami Marlins, who made the playoffs last year, but and they had some bright spots this year. They actually had a winning record at home. Their road record was not exactly very good, but they went 67-95. They missed out on the division by 21 games. I believe their run differential is a lot closer than their record would typically kind of say it is. But a team that they didn't really have the offensive firepower that they needed to be able to take advantage of a fantastic pitching staff, and a team also that traded away a lot of guys at the deadline, including probably the guy who would have been our player. We talk about for them in um in Starling Marte, who was incredible this year. But who is the player that you want to talk about from Miami this year?
Yeah, so we could have went with another guy who we've talked about a lot, and that's Sandy Alcantara. But we ended up going with Trevor Rogers instead. He was a rookie this year, 25 games, 133 innings pitched, a 10.62 strikeouts per nine, which is really damn good for a rookie. A 264 ERA, a 255 FIP. The xFIP didn't back that up fully with a 354, but I mean, this rotation we'd already talked about before had, the potential with, Sandy Alcantara, Pablo Lopez, a guy we didn't even see this year in Sixto Sanchez. They had Edward Cabrera down in the minors still that's going to come up, who's another top pitching prospect. Max Mayer is another big pitching prospect for them as well. Nobody really talked about Trevor Rogers, really. And he came in and did a really, really solid job for them and just makes that starting rotation even more, disgusting and fearful for if they can find some offense around that this could be a team that can make some serious serious runs here in the close future.
Yeah, Trevor Rogers came into this season as a guy who, he was a pretty high rated prospect, especially in the system. I think he was top 10 in the system and everything. But I don't think anybody saw this coming from him. Guy who had pitched a ton in the minor leagues, but had put up really good numbers in the minor leagues. But he had never pitched above Double A until last year when he pitched 28 innings for the big league club. Put up a 6.11 ERA. But this year came out, his velocity was up over last year by almost a full mile per hour. Has a devastating slider, good changeup, and he just pitched extremely well. Great control compared to kind of what you'd expect for a rookie. 311 walks per nine is really solid for a rookie, um, and he'll continue to improve on that, I believe. And this is a guy who has the makings every bit to be a really solid major league pitcher in the future. And it really, if it wasn't for another guy we're going to talk about in a little while, he would have been a pretty good candidate for rookie of the year, and still is a good candidate for rookie of the year.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost track there. Where were we at?
We were talking about Trevor Rogers and the Marlins, but we can move on next. We can talk about the Nationals real quick, and it's as I mentioned with the Marlins, traded away a lot of guys at the deadline. Um, the Nationals did as well, trading their they're arguing, they're who was at the time arguably their best player, but I think as the second half of the season's gone on, not that Trey Turner after the trade has been bad, but Juan Soto took another step forward, but. Um, you look at the Nationals and 65-97. What you know was it's hard to call it a really disappointing season because I think a lot of people kind of saw the writing on the wall with the Nationals and probably a decline there. But they did make some moves to try to contend in the offseason. So probably to a lot of people in their minds that was pretty disappointing. They weren't. They were just kind of hovering around like a few games under 500 for most of the first half, and then they kind of saw the writing on the wall, traded a bunch of guys away. Trey Turner, Max Scherzer both went elsewhere, but the Nationals did have some bright spots, and their big bright spot was um, to me was Lane Thomas. Lane Thomas is a guy who had never really done too much at the major league level. Um, he didn't really play all that much this year until late in the season. He was one of the guys that kind of came up after a while. A guy who's played in the Blue Jays organization and also the Cardinals. He actually played in the big leagues a little bit for the Cardinals in 2019 and 2020, but this year um, he played in the big leagues for really the first time he's had an extended amount of play time in the big leagues. And while he struggled a little bit with the Cardinals in the big leagues, he was actually really good with the Nationals. In 206 plate appearances, he hit 270. with a 364 on base, a 489 slugging percentage, and he put up 1.2 wins above replacement. That was just in 45 games. So late season acquisition for them. I believe they might have gotten him in the Lester trade. Is that right? Um,
It probably was the Lester trade. Now
yeah,
that we're going back and thinking about it, but like you said, Lane Thomas, he's been a serviceable outfielder before, and the Nationals were kind of hard to pick somebody with because, like you said, they traded a bunch of people off. I think the most impressive thing for me is his high on base percentage, but a 13% walk rate. Like, he's not been somebody that's really walked a lot in his career before at the major league level. So don't know if that's quite sustainable, but maybe he's a little piece that the Nationals could find that as they're entering this rebuild that can be solid for him for the next couple of years and get him by until they start making that push for winning again.
yeah, no doubt. And he wasn't rated poorly as a prospect with the Cardinals. He was their number 14 prospect before graduating from their system. But we'll see. He might end up being a guy who ends up being a starter for them at some point. So he's definitely got some potential there. But so that was our look at the NL East. Damien, you said you had our predictions for the NL East from preseason up. What did those look like? I know I picked the Braves before the season, not exactly for the reasons that they ended up winning the division for, but
Yeah.
um,
So we both actually our top threes were identical. We both picked the Braves to win the division. We both picked the Mets to finish second, and then the Phillies to finish third in the division. And then I ended up putting the Marlins for fourth and the Nationals fifth, and you had the Nationals fourth and the Marlins fifth. So we had the top three teams right, and and then we had pretty much the bottoms two just flipped. But or sorry, we didn't have the top three. We had the teams for the top three right, but we had
yeah,
the 2 and 3 flipped. And for a while it looked like the Mets were going to be a team that was maybe going to finish second until they just collapsed. So
yeah.
overall, I mean, it's not our worst predictions, which you'll come to hear just shortly here, but pretty solid. At least we have the division winner there.
Yeah, I think our reasoning was pretty good on these. Just the fact the Mets ended up with so many injuries, they probably would have finished second, or maybe still first. But they had so many injuries this year that it did keep them out of the having a winning record and having a really good season. So, um, but we'll move on. Look at the NL Central now. And the champion of the NL Central was the Milwaukee Brewers. And who would you like to talk about from the Milwaukee Brewers?
Yeah, so guy we haven't talked about as much for the Brewers. We've talked all year long about Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff, but that's the year that Freddie Peralta had. He'd been a guy who they bounced back and forth between the bullpen and the rotation, and they weren't quite sure what he was going to give them. And you kind of saw flashes last year, and even though it was only in 29 games, but he had a 3.99 ERA doesn't look that great, but the peripherals, a 2.41 and a 3.23 FIP and XFIP, and they kind of moved him back to the rotation this year. Not quite sure what to expect, but he came back with a 2.81 ERA, 3.12 FIP, 3.66 XFIP, and 144 innings. I mean, Freddie Peralta making that rotation just even nastier. It's not one that you want to face those top three with very often, and Peralta just makes that even a scarier 1, 2, 3 punch.
Yeah, no doubt. You look at this team, and there was a bunch of guys we could go with because like we talked about last week, we were talking about them having clinched. Our question marks coming into the season were offense, and there are a few guys that really took a step forward on offense for them as well. But we talked about them a bit last week, especially Willie Adames. But I mean, you look at Freddie Peralta and this rotation, as good as the top two were, and we knew that coming into the season. I don't know if we knew that Corbin Burns was going to be quiet this, but we knew he was going to be good, and obviously we did think Woodruff would be this, but I think we looked at when we looked at them, we thought they really needed a third guy, maybe even a fourth guy. They needed some improvement in their depth in their rotation, and this is just a perfect example of how that can happen. I mean, Peralta's a guy who, in the past has been pretty good. in his rookie year, a 3.72 FIP, although he had a 4.25 ERA. And his last couple of years, he's always put up huge strikeout numbers in his big league career. Just haven't been able to put a full season together. And he's also pitched out of the bullpen a lot at times. So being able to come out as a starter this year, put up the season he put up, was an all-star, did a fantastic job this year, and he really made that team. That was a big difference in that team being a 90-ish, 85 to 90 win team that was in a really tight battle for that division, and being the champion of that division with the 95 wins and being the 2 seed in the playoffs. So very, very good season for Peralta, and he's a major reason why the Brewers were able to pull out that division, which was probably better than a lot of people expected that division to be.
Yeah, and he's going to be a big reason if they make a run in this postseason. He's going to have to be a big contributor for them as well.
Absolutely.
But let's go ahead and jump over to the team that finished third or second in this division. Sorry, and that's the St. Louis Cardinals. They got that wild card berth facing the Dodgers, which we'll break down a little bit. But the guy that really stood out to me, we could have talked about Goldschmidt. We've talked a lot about Tyler O'Neill this year. Harrison Bader may have had a really good season, becoming a better threat offensively. But rookie Dylan Carlson, we saw him come up and make, in the extended playoffs right at the end of last year and make a little bit of a run in there. And he looked solid. But what did you think about Dylan Carlson this year?
Yeah, Dylan Carlson did some really good things for them this year. He's a guy who was top prospect coming in, and you know, for some reason it just felt to me like people didn't talk about him becoming a fantastic player, as soon as he has. I don't know why. I mean, he's a top 15 prospect and put up great numbers in the minor leagues. And, it didn't really make that much sense to me that nobody really seemed to believe in him too much coming into the season or really talk about him. But, I mean, he had a great season. Played 149 games, 619 plate appearances, got a lot of valuable experience with that. Hit 266 with a 343 on base, a 437 slugging percentage, good for 2.5 wins above replacement. The walk rate was solid, 9% walk rate. He saw the ball well. The strikeouts are probably a little high, but as a rookie, 24.6%, something that you can deal with. It'll come down a little bit over time as he gets more experience. 18 home runs, 113 WRC plus, good numbers there. He's a guy who he's athletic. He's a good prototypical corner outfield type guy, who I think is going to be a really solid, to above average, and maybe even at some point an all-star level player in a corner outfield there in St. Louis for a long time. So good looking rookie season for him, and one of the reasons that St. Louis did as well as they did, especially down the stretch, is the depth that they had. That we didn't really see that coming into the season. We saw an all-star player at third base in Arenado. We saw an all-star player in Paul Goldschmidt at first base, an all-star level player. And we saw some veteran leaders around the diamond as well, and on the mound. But you didn't see all the depth that they had. They ended up, with Harrison Bader putting up a great offensive season. They ended up with Tyler O'Neill putting up a great offensive season, and those guys have been talked about a lot. And Dylan Carlson's been a guy who's just added a lot of depth to that lineup, and that's been really good for the Cardinals. So good for them. They're going to be playing that wild card game, so we'll discuss them a little bit more here in a bit. But the Cardinals, 90 wins, really solid season. I think there were a lot of people who did kind of think they had a shot at the playoffs, but I don't know if too many people expected them to be a 90-win team this year. And some veteran resurgence and some of the young guys that contributing have really led to that. So good for good for the Cardinals.
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump to the third place team here. It's a team that we thought they were in the hunt for the wild card a lot longer than many teams probably expected this year. And that's the Cincinnati Reds, and one of the main reasons behind that was the breakout of Jonathan India this year of being a really solid major league player, a guy who had never been above Double A, before 2019, didn't play at all in 2020. I think he might have been at the alternate camp, but didn't get any time in the majors. And then they pretty much relied on him as the everyday second baseman this year, the 150 games, A 269 average, a 376 on base, a 459 slugging. I mean, 21 homers, 98 runs, 69 runs batted in. I mean, he was a leadoff guy for him. 12 stolen bases, a WRC plus of 122, and an overall season WAR of 4.0. It's not a bad rookie season, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this is the guy who, to a lot of people, will end up being rookie of the year. Although you could still argue for Trevor Rogers, in my opinion. But this guy, he's been incredible. I mean, he puts up good at bats. I mean, you look at a rookie having an 11% walk rate over a full season. That's really, really solid. He obviously has a good approach at the plate, real discipline there. His strikeouts were, 22% is a little bit high, but it's not too bad. But he hit 21 home runs, hit for some power. The on base skills are really what put him forward, and also played a good infield too. He's a guy who can move around the diamond a little bit. I think he played mostly second base this year,
Yeah.
but in college he played third base, and he's um, at times he's played played at shortstop too. I think they tried him at least in the minor leagues at shortstop. So definitely a really solid looking player, guys that they can build around, um, and fantastic stuff by by Jonathan India this year.
Yeah, it was a real breakout and a real big push for that Reds team that
Yeah,
probably expected more from Mustakis and Suarez and stuff.
yeah,
India probably shouldn't have even been the main second baseman,
yeah.
with Mustakis there, but
Yeah, and one more thing with the Reds, they went 83 and 79. I think you do have to mention the breakouts, or really the not necessarily breakouts also, but just 'cause some of the kind of career renaissance we saw from them. Um, you saw Joey Votto come back and have a really good season. You saw Castellanos, who struggled a lot last year, come back and have a really good season. So, you know, the Reds definitely had some good things going for them offensively, which was their downfall last year. But they just weren't able to get it done when it mattered the most late in the season, as they had a real shot at that wild card late. They just couldn't quite get over the hump. So but moving on, the next team here, another one of those teams that really struggled, but traded off a lot of pieces at the deadline, and by a lot of pieces, I mean a lot of pieces. It was finally that fire sale we were looking for this year, but that would be the Chicago Cubs. They did have one player in the second half on their 71 and 91 season that really showed off and showed out.
yeah, that player's Frank Schwindel. I don't know exactly how to say it, but he's a guy who they acquired in the Andrew Chafin trade from the Oakland A's, right around the deadline, right there. And he had played 6 games in the majors with Kansas City in 2019. Was not good. I mean, at .067 on base and batting average. I mean, he didn't have one walk at all, and you know, didn't really expect much from him. He's an older guy, or older prospect, I should say, at 29 years old, and got a real opportunity when they traded Anthony Rizzo away to kind of be the everyday first baseman, and he didn't really disappoint at all. I mean, he came in 259 plate appearances, hit 14 homers, 44 runs, 43 RBIs, a couple stolen bases. A 6.2 walk percentage is it's decent. A 15.8 strikeout percentage isn't too bad. 326 average, a 371 on base. I mean, it's good for a 152 WRC plus and a season WAR of 2.1. In 64 games, it's not too bad. And the Cubs are, like we said, they entered that fire sale. They're going to call it a retooling, but it's pretty much they're a rebuilding. They're going to try and spend some money this offseason, but maybe Schwindel gets that first baseman job for a little while. I mean, like I said, he is an older one at 29, but bunch of team control left, and maybe you find a solid piece for the team going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely expect him to end up getting that nod at at first base next year after the season he put up since getting up to the big leagues with the Cubs. But man, that his stats with the Cubs just incredible after getting called back up. Like you said, well, he had 13 homers with the Cubs. He had one with the A's, but um, just 342 average, 389 on base, and a 613 slugging. It's just incredible. And you look at a guy who at first base played a pretty good first base. And you look at him going forward as a guy who he might really be a guy the Cubs can count on, late bloomer type prospect. Really pretty good as a prospect. I mean, he's hit at every level of the minor leagues, everywhere he's been, and he's been in AAA for a long time. So, maybe a late bloomer, a guy maybe like a little bit like a Garrett Cooper or somebody like that who ends up at in their upper 20s getting that call up, um, getting it and figuring it out to a certain level, and becoming a really useful player. I don't expect him to put up a 326 average in the future and put up tons of home runs and stuff, but I think he'll be a solid player who could be an everyday first baseman in the future, and something that the Cubs got for just Andrew Chafin, and that's a really nice pickup for them. I believe that's who they got him for, was Andrew Chafin.
Yeah, it
But
was.
yeah, so just got him, just a reliever is all it took to get him, and really nice pickup for them. And I think he's going to be a guy to watch going forward for a team that, like you said, definitely on the downswing, going into rebuild mode. We'll see what they do in the off season. They might end up picking up some guys, but I mean, definitely a team that I don't look forward to being some kind of you know contender anytime soon. But moving on, the final team in this division, and the first team we'll talk about that lost 100 games, is the Pittsburgh Pirates. They went 61 and 101, and they did have they traded away a bunch of guys at the deadline, but they did keep one who had a fantastic season, a breakout season. And would like to talk about Brian Reynolds. So what did you think of Brian Reynolds' season?
Yeah, Brian Reynolds' season was nice. We had seen flashes of this, like his 2019 season. He had a pretty similar stat line, with a 314 average, a 377 on base, and a 130 WRC plus. But he just, 2020 was a real down year. Kind of everyone started losing faith in him again, and he bounced back in 2021 with 159 games, uh, you know 646 plate appearances, 24 home runs, 93 runs, 90 RBIs, 302 average, 390 on base percentage. So even got on base by walking a little bit more. 142 WRC plus, a 5.7 WAR. He was a guy who people aggressively tried to get at the trade deadline from the Pirates, and they decided to hold on to him, and they want him to kind of be one of their stars of the future when they start trying to win in the next couple years.
Yeah, no doubt. You look at his season, and he upped his power, and that was a big thing. His plate discipline was improved, and his power was improved. He hit the ball harder than he has, and you look at his 142 WRC plus is nice, and honestly, at 5.7 WAR, if the Pirates were any good, he could have been considered a realistic MVP candidate. With he was less than a full, or he was about right at a point from a one win above replacement from leading the league. He was top 10 and wins above replacement. He had a really great year, and not enough people talked about Brian Reynolds just because he was on the 101 loss Pirates. But he's definitely a piece for them going forward, or if they want to move him, he could get a king's ransom with the amount of control he has left. So, really kind of kick all, help supplement that rebuild, kind of be a key piece of, get a key piece of, the get, really do get a huge package in return for him. So we'll see what they end up doing with Brian Reynolds. But I liked what I saw from him this year, and I think he was the only guy to hit more than 10 home runs on the Pirates, or to be in double digits at all. So that's pretty incredible that in 2021 a Major League Baseball team only had one guy. I'm not sure if that was the case, but I think he was the only guy with double digit home runs for them this year. So um, that's Colin Moran had 10 exactly. So I guess Colin Moran also had double digits. But either way, and Gregory Polanco had 11. But either way, I mean that was pretty poor showing from the Pirates this year, and Brian Reynolds was absolutely an easy bright spot for them.
Yeah, he really was. Looking at the NL Central, preseason predictions, we both had the Brewers winning the division. Where we came up wrong was we both had the Cubs finishing second. The Cardinals third, the Reds fourth, and then we did have the Pirates, rounding out this division. But kind of like we both were a little higher on the Cubs, thought maybe they weren't going to do the fire sale all the way, and that the Reds wouldn't have the bounce back or breakouts of Jonathan India, renaissance of Joey Votto, and some of their pitching staffs like Wade Miley being better, and that the Cardinals just wouldn't find that Cardinal magic and find some way to win 17 straight games. I don't think we could have predicted that at any point in the preseason for sure. But
Yeah,
it's not too bad of a prediction for sure. We have a lot worse.
yeah. Well, when you look at the Cubs too, they had worst case scenario performances from a lot of their guys. Like Kyle Hendricks took a step back. You look at you look at Zach Davies took a huge step back, guy that they got in that trade. None of their young guys really came up and took a step forward on the mound. They did have some good bullpen performances. Craig Kimbrell did really well before the trade, but they could have finished with a much better record than they did. But the fact that they had to trade those guys. At the deadline, just being a little under 500, they really had to do that because they probably weren't going to pass the Brewers, and I don't think they could have won enough games to get into the wild card. But it was definitely disappointing for them. But everywhere else, I mean, I think everyone else finished with pretty similar records to what we expected. I don't know. I didn't especially expect the Cardinals to get 90 wins, but I did expect them to be just around 500. But kind of take the wins that we gave the Cubs and give them to the Cardinals, and there you go. So definitely a good season for the Brewers and the Cardinals with that magical September. Congratulations to them, and we'll see where this division is going forward. This is going to be an interesting division to look at in the next few years because I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the Cubs rebuild goes, and what the Brewers can do to supplement their pitching staff in the future. So
Yeah, let's jump over to the NL West, and we'll kind of go a little bit quicker through these. Finish out this because I know we're already really long, and we want to be able to spend some time breaking down the wild card games for you guys. But the Giants won this division, pretty shocking to everybody. I think they ended up with 107 wins on the season. I don't think anybody ever saw that coming. But a big breakout guy that they had, Buster Posey had a career renaissance as well. Brandon Crawford and Brandon Belt both were big contributors for them. But the main guy that they had give them some really solid contributions was Darren Ruff. A guy who started his career in Philadelphia, then actually went over to the KBO, the Korean Baseball League, and spent 3 years over there before coming back in 2020 to the Giants. He was solid last season as well, but at 34 this year, 312 plate appearances. He was a part of a platoon for a little while, but a 271 average, a 385 on base, a 519 slugging, 144 WRC plus, and a 2.5 WAR. It's just kind of the method that the Giants, have found of players that they know can do things well and will only exploit what they can do well. And they've kind of found that with Ruff of being a platoon player and not running him out there too much, but he'll give them some pretty solid at bats if you can keep that up.
yeah, looking at Darren Ruff, one thing that stood out to me was the fact that after he got back from Korea, his he had become a lot more patient at the plate, and 15% walk rate this year was big for him. He's always been a guy with power, but being able to pair that with some plate discipline and some patience really took him to the next level, made him into a really good player. But 107 wins from the Giants this year was pretty shocking, to say the least. But second place in the division by one game was the 106 win Dodgers. That and they had a fantastic season. And it's hard to call a 106 win season a disappointment, but not winning that division definitely disappointing for them. But who did you, obviously as a Dodger fan, you've got your eye on them all the time. Who did you pick for the Dodgers? Kind of shout out this year.
I went with AJ Pollock. He's a guy who that offseason where Bryce Harper was a free agent. Of course, every Dodger fan wanted Bryce Harper, and they ended up getting AJ Pollock, and a lot of people didn't like that and the contract they gave him and said that it was an overpay. And he had always battled injuries, and he struggled in 2019, but the past couple years he's had a really good year or couple seasons. And this year's no shortage. I mean, 117 games, so he still missed a lot of time, but 21 homers, 53 runs, 69 RBIs, a 297 average, a 355 on base, a 536 slugging, a 137 WRC plus, and a 3.1 WAR, which is one to like what fifth or sixth overall on the team. And you look how stacked this team is, and for him to be sixth on this team for contributions so far, through the batters, when you have guys like Chris Taylor and Cody Bellinger that are lower, and guys who should definitely be ahead of him. Kind of Pollock looks more like a bargain now than anything, and he's been. I don't know if the team would be where they are right now if it wasn't for Pollock. For a month or two of that season, he was the best player overall, with Mookie struggling and Seager out and Bellinger out as well. So, big shout out to AJ Pollock for sure.
Yeah, but moving on, Dodgers great season. You know, shocking that they didn't win the division, but I guess you went 106 games, so you did all you could. It's just the fact
Yeah,
that the Giants were so crazy this year.
yeah,
But I do want to move on quickly here. The Padres this year, super disappointing season for them. It seemed like nothing nothing worked out for them. Um, in general, they did have great season from Tatis, that possible MVP season, but the one guy that really stood out to me, kind of I guess a breakout year, although he was really good last year too. But Joe Musgrove had a really good year. In 181 innings, 31 starts, he put up a 3.18 ERA. He, had a great strikeout rate, cut his walk rate a lot from last year, which was really impressive. His peripherals were good, maybe not quite as good as they were last year, honestly, with the peripheral wise. 370 FIP, 365 XFIP, did put up 3.3 wins above replacement. Really good season for him. He was really one of the only bright spot of the new guys they brought in. A lot of their guys kind of just really struggled. Blake Snell struggled. Um, Yu Darvish struggled and dealt with injury. Both of those guys really dealt with injuries, but mainly Darvish. Dinelson Lamet was so good last year. He dealt with his injuries for a lot of the year. Didn't ever figure it out. Ended up pitching out of the bullpen. And offensively, they were really solid, but it was kind of the same key contributors that we've been talking about with them for a while. So definitely wanted to shout out Joe Musgrove. Also threw the no hitter early in the season. That was almost a perfect game. So great season for Joe Musgrove.
yeah, absolutely. Musgrove coming home to San Diego is a feel good story for sure. But we'll move over to Colorado now. A team we kind of expected to be a little bit worse even than they were. But the player that we kind of caught our eye was CJ Crone. A guy who had bounced around the past couple years. Finally found an everyday job here in Colorado, and he didn't disappoint one bit. 28 homers and 547 plate appearances. 70 RBIs, 92 or 70 runs. Sorry, 92 RBIs, a 281 average, 375 on base percentage, a 530 slugging, a 127 WRC plus, and a 2.4 WAR. Could have did maybe Ryan McMahon, but he struggled more towards the second half. And Trevor Story, we all know Trevor Story already, but look for CJ Crone. We'll talk more about him in the offseason for sure, because this performance this year is going to make him a lot more money when he hits the free agent market this offseason.
Yeah. You talk about CJ Crone, and this is his fifth season in 5 years, and this was his best career season. And I think the thing that stands out to me is the fact that he's been more patient this year at the plate, and while striking out even a little bit less than he has in his career, and that combined with the fact that he's now hitting in Coors really helped out helped him put up a really good season this year. But and Colorado, encouraging year for them, honestly, because I don't think anybody really expected them to end up, being 70, even having 74 wins. I mean, they could have had 75. They only played 161 games. That game that got canceled. So definitely a little bit of an encouraging season from the Rockies. They had some bright spots, and CJ Crone was one of the biggest bright spots for them. But moving on to a team that there really weren't many bright spots this year, and that would be the team that finished 55 games out of first place and tied for the worst record in the majors, and that's the Arizona Diamondbacks. As somebody who's watched them a lot this year, who would you who would you look at from the Arizona Diamondbacks?
Yeah, the only other person, I mean, the big one's going to be Cattell Marte, but the main one that we wanted to hit on was going to be Rojas. Like you said, there's not many bright spots, so these stats aren't going to look great. But for what he did this year for them, he was consistent. A 264 average, a 341 on base, a 102 WRC plus. So he was an above average hitter for this team who was not above average in pretty much anything, and a 2.2 WAR. A lone bright spot for them. Maybe they can get some other solid things, but from them, but a 100 loss team. I mean, you're not going to really find many bright spots for them. So Josh Rojas is somebody that he'll be solid for him going forward, and maybe he might be there when they are age 27 when they're getting good right at the tail end. But
Yeah, definitely a guy that looks like a potential, bench player at the major league level, and in his career has been a solid defender before this year, which took a little bit of a step back there, but with defensive metrics they can be kind of inconsistent. So, encouraging to see a guy like him put up a 2 wins above replacement season, which kind of equates to a solid everyday player. So, maybe a guy that they can have going forward, or if he kind of puts this up again next year, they could maybe trade him at the deadline.
yeah,
So
so go just look at the division prediction standings we had so far, or for the NL West. Is you had the Padres winning the division, the Dodgers second, Giants third, Diamondbacks fourth, and the Rockies fifth. And I had the Dodgers winning it with the Padres second, D-backs third. Actually, I had the Giants fourth in this division, so shame on me for underrating them so much, and then the Rockies bringing it up.
yeah,
So
yeah, everyone underrated the Giants. I mean, most of the projection systems. I saw one the other day had them at 74 wins.
yeah,
So, I mean, they won 107 games, just an unbelievably insane season for them. And I don't think anyone really expected the Diamondbacks to be as bad as they were. I don't think anybody expected them to be a playoff team or anything like that. But, I think you kind of flip flop them and the Rockies is kind of what people expected coming in. But definitely a tough season for them, but a really wild season in the NL West. And like I said, the disappointment of the Padres and the shocking season from the Giants really was a big surprise this year, and that was one of the more topsy turvy divisions all year. But moving on, we're going to look at the AL East real quick. This was probably the most interesting division in baseball this year, and the winner was the 100 win Tampa Bay Rays. So shout out to them. That was their best ever regular season by winning percentage or by win totals. And who are we shouting out from the Rays?
we're gonna shout out Brandon Lau from the Tampa Bay Rays, second baseman. You kind of saw the power breakout in the postseason last year. He kind of carried them for a little bit of that time, him and Randy Rosarena, but this year he kind of backed that up. 39 homers, 97 runs, 99 RBIs. The average doesn't look great at 247, but a 340 on base percentage, a 523 slugging, a 137 WRC plus, and a 5.3 WAR. This is kind of a very Tampa Bay Rays type player. They find just players who can do things great. He's not going to hit for high average, but he's going to play a solid second base. He's going to hit for a lot of power, and just be a solid overall player and get them. That's how they continuously do it. So shout out Brandon Lau.
Yeah, you talk about him as a guy who, we expected him. He had a great year last year. We expected him to be really, really good this year, and people were asking what was wrong with him after the first half of the season, and then he ended up putting up a 5.3 wins above replacement year. So, just doing Rays things there. Second place in this division, the Red Sox finished at 92 and 70. They are the wild card one, as they tied with the Yankees, but I believe had the better head-to-head record this season. So, the Red Sox ended up there, and for their season, we wanted to shout out the former Dodger, Kike Hernandez, who put up his best season of his career. Playing in more of an everyday role there. He put up a four wins above replacement, which was really really solid. He's always been a good defender, 9.6 defensive value. Good base runner, does everything well. The thing that stood out this year, he really improved his walk rate over his last 2 years in LA. He's never been a high average guy, mainly because the batting average on balls in play, but 20 home runs this year, a 250 average, 337 on base, 449 slugging, a 110 WRC plus, and like I said, that 4.0 WAR was really really solid for Kike Hernandez, and definitely the best of his career. So, great pickup from the Boston Red Sox, and belief in him as an everyday player. Where after he was kind of a bench player for his entire career so far.
Yeah, this season kind of rivals his 2018 year with the Dodgers, where he kind of got that more of that everyday role. Um, and I mean, you look at a lot of the stats, and they're almost identical across the board. And so, really good to see Kike thriving. He's a person that I hated seeing the Dodgers lose, but I knew he was going to be able to do something special with Boston, especially with that connection with Alex Cora for sure. But we'll go ahead and jump over to the New York Yankees now, and this one was a little bit more difficult because we have Garrett Cole and then all of their hitters that that did well. You expect to do well. So the guy that we really wanted to shout out is Jonathan Loizaga. He kind of fell into that high leverage role that they had kind of put Chad Green in the past couple of years. High leverage guy that can pitch multiple innings at a time. A former starter that they're throwing into the bullpen. A really great season, a 2.17 ERA, a 258 FIP, a 315 xFIP, and 70 innings pitched with an 8.79 Ks per nine and a 2.04 walks per nine.
Yeah, Jonathan Isaac is a guy that I remember watching him when he first came up, and thinking, man, this guy actually has a chance to be really good. And then he's just kind of been stuck in the mud for a few years as a big leaguer. But this year they kind of put him in a new role as a full time bullpen guy, and he was fantastic. You mentioned those numbers, but the number that stands out to me is the 61% ground ball rate, which is really good for a guy who is able to get as many strikeouts, as he does and limit the walks like he does. It's very difficult to put up that kind of ground ball percentage and get swings and misses. So, um, like you said, the 258 FIP is incredible, 217 ERA, and he also improved his fastball velocity by a full mile per hour. He's averaging over 98 mile per hour on his fastball now. So definitely a breakout year for him, and a big piece of that bullpen that at times has not looked as good this year as they have in the past few years. So great year for or great gig. Great year for Jonathan Loizaga, and we'll see if he's able to continue this form moving on into the postseason because they're going to need it in that wild card game. But moving on, the fourth place team, which kind of sucks to call them a fourth place team because they won 91 games, but
Yeah.
the Toronto Blue Jays finished fourth, missed the playoffs in about one game behind the Yankees and Red Sox, and they had a great season. And who would you want to shout out from them?
Yeah, so the guy we're going to shout out, we've talked about him a lot the past couple of weeks, but that's Robbie Ray. I mean, you could have went with Marcus Semien, but we kind of knew that. I mean, Vlad had a breakout, but he's been a top prospect. We've talked a lot about him as well, but Robbie Ray for sure. Somebody that they traded for last year at the deadline from Arizona, and kind of had that breakout this year. He finally was able to drop that walks per nine down a little bit. He had his career is 3.95 walks per nine. He had a 2.47 this year. He's always been somebody who could strike a lot of people out, and he kept that up this year with over 11 Ks per nine, a 2.84 ERA. The expected numbers aren't as great, an expected ERA of 3.54 and a FIP of 3.69, but a 3.9 WAR season, which is zero point 0.6 better than any season he's had in his career. He's most likely the Cy Young favorite. He'll probably be battling Garrett Cole with that one, but Robbie Ray is a guy who it kind of was the most shocking to us out of everything that happened with the Blue Jays this year that he was this good. So wanted to give the nod to Robbie Ray for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. He was fantastic this year. I really liked what I saw from him. And like you said, the big difference for him was the improvement in that walk rate. Just a crazy, crazy improvement after last year looking so lost on the mound, and to be able to put up what he did this year. Definitely the best season of his career, and a guy who for a long time has looked like a guy who could potentially have a late career breakout. But great season from Robbie Ray. Definitely, I believe he was on a 1 year deal, so he'll definitely make himself some money in the off season. But the last place team here, and as you would expect with a division that had four teams with over 90 wins, the last place team had a miserable season. Um, and their season was, or that team was the Baltimore Orioles. They went 52 and 110. They actually did get the number one pick in the draft this for next year, so that's some good news for them. But and they had a fantastic breakout player.
Yeah, they had Cedric Mullins is the guy that we're going to shout out. You know, you could have went with Ryan Mountcastle as well, but Cedric Mullins, just a fantastic year, a 30-30 year, 30 home runs, 30 stolen bases, 91 runs. You know, a guy 291 average, 360 on base, 518 slugging, a 136 WRC plus, 5.3 WAR even. And, you know, his defensive value isn't as great as what we would think it probably should be for somebody with his speed, but you know, really solid season. I mean, 30 home runs from a guy whose career high in the majors before was 4 home runs, you know, in 191 at bats. So he definitely found his power stroke somehow this year.
Yeah, fantastic year for him. Gave up switch hitting, and I believe that was kind of the springboard for him this year. Kind of just always hitting lefty really helped his really helped him out. Kind of concentrating on his strong side. But we'll move on. What was looking at our predictions? I believe we both picked the Yankees, right?
Yeah, so we both picked the Yankees to win, and then from there it pretty much gets shuffled around. You had the Blue Jays in second, the Rays in third, the Red Sox in fourth, and then the Orioles in fifth. I had the Yankees winning, the Rays in second, the Blue Jays in third, and then I actually had the Orioles in fourth and the Red Sox in fifth. I was not very high on the Red Sox coming into this year, and they definitely put the big old Boston beating back to me, and then showed themselves into that wild card, but. You know, let down from the Yankees. We both expected the Rays to be right there, and you were a little higher on the Blue Jays than I was.
Yep, definitely an interesting season in the AL East, and a season that turned out really entertaining. But moving on, let's talk real quick about the AL Central, the champion in this division, and we probably won't spend much time at all in this division because most of these teams are really bad. But the White Sox had a great season, won the division, and I think the primary reason for that was their pitching staff, and their pitching staff was led by a guy who was non-tendered in the offseason, and that's Carlos Rodon. It was, we had a good choice on who we could pick from there. There were a bunch of guys who you could have potentially picked from the White Sox pitching staff, but Carlos Rodon in 132 innings, he did deal with some injuries down the stretch, but put up a 2.37 ERA with a 2.65 FIP and a 3.17 xFIP. That is good for 4.9 wins above replacement on the season. And this is from a guy who was non-tendered in the offseason, put up an 8.22 ERA last year in just a few innings, and had never broken a 4 ERA as a full-time starter. So definitely a fantastic breakout season from Carlos Rodon.
Yeah, we could have went with Dylan Cease, but Rodon just had too good of a year, and we think he deserved the nod, even though we've talked about him so much. Just it's a fantastic story of what he was able to do, and most likely going to make himself some decent money in the free agency this offseason. So, but let's go ahead and jump over to the Cleveland Indians or Guardians or whatever you want to call them. I guess now that the season's over, they're going to be officially started calling the Guardians, I would guess. But the player that we ended up going with was one of their main pieces from that Francisco Lindor trade last year, and that's Ahmed Rosario.
Yeah, Ahmed Rosario had a good season. He's a guy that needs to. He's a guy that can be a solid everyday player if he does everything right, and does all the small things. But and this year, he's a limited ceiling as a hitter. He only hit 282 with a 321 on base, 409 slugging, 11 home runs. But that's good for about a league average hitter. But what he does extremely well has always been defense and base running. 13 stolen bases, positive base running metrics, really solid defense. Put up 588 plate appearances this year. That's something that was a struggle for him last year, staying healthy even over a shortened season. But he was able to put up a career best 2.7 WAR. Actually, I think it's the second best by point one. WAR. But he put up a really solid season with a 2.7 WAR. Definitely showed himself to be a solid everyday regular at shortstop, and there might be something to unlock there in the future if he can continue to grow as a hitter and be a little bit more patient at the plate in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and jump over to the the Detroit Tigers. And the player that we wanted to mention here is Heimer Candelario. You know, we had talked a lot about Akil Baddoo or maybe even Jonathan Scope, but Candelario is a guy who's kind of really flew under the radar for them this year. A 271 average, a 351 on base, a 443 slugging, a 119 WRC plus, 3.1 WAR. So he led the team in WAR. 16 homers, 75 runs, 67 RBIs. Just a really solid year. I believe he was their everyday third baseman.
Yeah.
I think he's everyday third baseman. They got him in the Castellanos trade, didn't they?
No, they
No,
got him for Justin Wilson and Alex
that's
Avila.
right. It wasn't the Castellanos one. It was
Yeah,
the
so
other
I
one.
mean, this is a guy that he's had a couple of decent seasons for them so far, but this is kind of his best season, a little bit of a breakout. Um, he's kind of just a solid all around player, does everything pretty well, doesn't do anything exceptionally well, but they got him for pretty much nothing, and he's been a really solid player for them, and I look for him to continue that, be a solid player going forward. But definitely something to look at for the Tigers, who record wise ended up a little bit better than I think most people were expecting. I think people looked at them as probably a 9,500 loss team, and they ended up winning 77 games. Had a winning record at home. Had some good moments. Got to watch Miguel Cabrera hit number 500 this year. So the Tigers kind of had a little bit of an improvement this year. First year for AJ Hinch was success there. But moving on, looking at the number 4 team in this division by one game behind the Tigers. Excuse me, 3 games behind the Tigers, and that would be the Kansas City Royals. And who do we have here?
Yeah, so we kind of have two people we wanted to shout out. One is Nicky Lopez, who just had a great season overall. I mean, he's not a big power hitter, but a good contact on base guy. 300 average, 365 on base. The slugging's going to be low, but a 106 WRC plus and a 4.4 WAR. Great defensive player as well. Just a overall, really solid player. And honestly, if it had not been for Salvador Perez, leading the league as a catcher in homers and RBIs, he would have been the easy choice. But Salvador Perez is one of the guys. It's just an insane season that a catcher is able to lead the league in homers and RBIs. It's very often or very rare you see anything like that.
Yeah, and you talk about Salvador Perez with his 48 home runs. That's just an incredible season. But it's funny, Nicky Lopez led that team by a full run. I mean, by a full win and wins above replacement, which is pretty crazy. And mainly because Salvador Perez was as good as he was at the plate, was absolutely atrocious behind the plate this year. So definitely something to look for there. Pretty surprising to see Nicky Lopez up there, and a 9% walk rate for a guy that that doesn't ever hit for power is pretty impressive, because as a power hitter, a lot of teams, a lot of guys, you're scared of a lot of power hitters throw the ball outside the zone, try to keep them from hitting home runs. But for a guy like Nicky Lopez, guy hit 2 home runs this year. You have to have a very good eye, because they're just going to attack you if you don't hit home runs, and that's something that he did great this year, was get on base, and 365 on base with a guy with his kind of speed is really 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 solid. So definitely a great season for Nicky Lopez.
Yeah, it really is. Let's go ahead into the team we had in the base or that was in the basement of this division, and that's the Minnesota Twins. We wanted to give a shout out to Jorge Polanco.
Yeah, Jorge Polanco is a guy who's been a pretty solid player for them for a while. But this year, after struggling a little bit last year, he put up a 4 win above replacement season. There weren't too many, or not too many people talking about him, but he moved to second base. Improved a little bit defensively, playing there. After with Andrelton Simmons being their shortstop. A 122 WRC plus with a 269 average, 323 on base, 503 slugging, hit 33 home runs, which is by far a career high. So the guy who really improved his power stroke this year, and he was really solid, and it's really encouraging to look for the Twins to see him have a great year, and he's under control for a few more years on a pretty good contract. So, guy to kind of build around as they kind of retool there in Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we're gonna look at the division predictions that we had, and we both, or I had the Minnesota Twins winning it, so they went from winning in mine to being last in this division in the real world. But you had the White Sox winning, the Twins in second. We both had the Indians, Royals, and Tigers third, fourth, and fifth in this division. So Twins kind of blowing it for both of us. I think we both had them as wild card teams or in the playoffs at least. So
Yeah, Twins dealt with a lot of injuries this year,
yeah.
and they had some underperformance from a couple pitchers. But you know, they it was tough. I mean, they had to trade away a few guys at the deadline, and they had a really tough year. And we'll see if they're able to figure it out going forward next year. But moving on, last division to talk about real quick is the American League West. And in the AL West, we had the Astros win the division. That was a very very impressive season for them. And who was the guy who kind of led that team this year?
So the guy we went with was Kyle Tucker. You could have went with Correa or Altuve or any of the main guys. Even Jordan had a great season, but the breakout that Kyle Tucker kind of had, he got that everyday role this year. He'd kind of been a platoon player before for them, but 140 games this year, 30 home runs, 92 RBIs, 14 stolen bases, 294 average, a 359 on base percentage, a 147 WRC plus, and a season WAR of 4.8. It was a real breakout season for Kyle Tucker, and part of the reason that we weren't so high on the Astros to begin with is because the loss of George Springer, and Kyle Tucker pretty much made up for that.
Yeah, no doubt. Moving forward in this division, probably the second most surprising team in baseball behind the Giants was the Seattle Mariners. And from their team, they had a lot of candidates for this, and the main one probably was Ty France, who put up a easily breakout season. But I want to talk about someone else because we did talk about Ty France a good bit. I want to talk about J.P. Crawford, who nobody has really mentioned too much, but he's a really solid shortstop. Very very good defensive player. He came over in the Segura trade to Seattle a few years ago, and he's put up a really solid statistics this year. Was an above average hitter in the league for the first time. 273 average, 338 on base, 376 slugging isn't great, but you look at his plate discipline being really solid, 8% walk rate, just a 16% strikeout rates, not pretty good numbers there. That league above league average hitter is a good thing to see for a shortstop, and especially for a guy who's a fantastic defensive shortstop. So really nice year for J.P. Crawford, and kind of a guy you can look at as a building block for them going forward.
Yeah, J.P. Crawford, a guy who kind of we talked about before that the Phillies kind of threw away in that Segura trade and kind of just blindsided him. So good to see that he's finally finding his stride in the major leagues because he came up as one of the most exciting prospects to come into the game. But we'll jump over to Oakland and do the player that we wanted to shout out here. It's actually going to be pitcher Frankie Montas. He has been a guy who he's been traded a couple times, got suspended for drugs even at one point, and then people weren't sure if he was ever going to be durable enough to be a starter. And he came out this year in 32 starts, 187 innings pitched, a 3.37 ERA, a 3.37 FIP. So I mean that's identical. It backed it up exactly with an xFIP of 3.64. It's just a really good season for Frankie Montas after everything he's went through to kind of finally find stable footing in the majors and prove that he's not just a good pitcher, but he can be an upper rotation arm.
Yeah, fantastic season for him. 187 innings, like you said, 9.96 strikeouts per nine was really nice to see. Cut his walk rate from last year by a good bit, and this is his second 2 out of 3 years that he's put up fantastic rate statistics. Of course, in 2019 only 16 starts, but this year put up similar rate numbers to what he did 2019. So this is a guy who really is a solid piece for them going forward. But moving on to the fourth place team, the Angels finished at 77 and 85. They had a really up and down season. They badly missed Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon, to injuries for most of the year. But guy that kind of had a little bit of a breakout this year there was Jared Walsh. Hit 29 home runs in 144 games, a 277 average, 340 on base, and 509 slugging for a 127 WRC plus. Really solidified himself as the first baseman of the future there in LA after Albert Pujols moved home.
Yeah, they kind of just needed to get him an opportunity, and trading Pujols away, kind of giving him that runway, and he kind of took it and ran with it for sure. So good season for Jared Walsh. It's going to be exciting watching him, kind of grow and move forward. But let's go ahead and move over to the last team in this division. I think it's the team that most of us expected to be the worst team in the league this year, but that's going to be the Texas Rangers. Not many bright spots here. Joey Gallo still led this team in WAR, and he was traded at the deadline. So that should tell you pretty much everything you need to know about the Texas Rangers. Adolis Garcia was a guy who we could have talked about, but he kind of really fell off at the end of the year. Just the season overall doesn't look great. So we ended up going with Nate Lowe, a guy who got traded from Tampa Bay over here to Texas. I believe, I forget what the trade was, but he really had struggled the first half of the year, and then kind of later in the second half, right after the All-Star break, picked it up a little bit more. 264 average, a 357 on base, a 115 WRC plus, and a 1.6 WAR. Just solid season overall. He still has a lot of strikeout rate, so he's got to try and find a way to cut that down. But a big walk rate at 12.5%. So there's hope here, and Texas just trying to find anybody right now. So.
Yeah, he had a good offensive season. He's got to work on himself on the defensive end, though. Had a really poor season at first base, which is pretty bad. But he definitely needs to work on that. But he should be able to do better than the -15 defensive value, and look forward. I mean, he might even end up being a guy that DHs and improves on that. That really hurt his overall value this year, but definitely an interesting season in the West. What did our predictions look like there?
Oh boy, so here we go on this one. We both had the Angels winning the division. We both had the Astros finishing second in the division. You actually had the Mariners in third, the A's in fourth, and then the Rangers at the bottom. I had Oakland third, Seattle fourth, and then Texas rounding out the bottom of this division.
Yeah, so I think I think that's fair because the Angels missed the best player in baseball for most of the season, and Rendon for a good portion of the season as well. So they probably wouldn't have finished first, but they definitely would have been closer in the running than they ended up with those guys playing. So
Yeah, overall, so that's pretty much how things ended right now, or how things ended for the season breakdown. We'll jump over and start previewing these wild card games real quick, and let's go ahead and start in the American League, where we're going to get the probably the biggest rivalry in baseball, and that's going to be the Yankees and Red Sox.
yeah, so the American League wild card game is tomorrow night. And the Yankees playing in Boston. They tied in the standings. Obviously these teams are so familiar with each other. The Yankees are going to have Garrett Cole going for them, which is very, very good that they were able to get that lined up and still hold on to their division. Or hold on to their hold on to that their position in the wild card. And then Nate Eovaldi has been fantastic this year, and Ona, when you look at the metrics, has been every bit as good as Cole. So this will definitely be an interesting matchup. Obviously the Yankees and Red Sox, a lot of history, a lot of playing each other. That crowd is going to be absolutely raucous in Boston, and I can't wait to see what happens there. I don't. It's hard to make a pick, but man, something tells me the Red Sox, with their consistency of their lineup, are going to be able to win this game.
And they're probably going to have a little chip on their shoulder because you remember just recently the Yankees went into Boston.
Yep,
Didn't they sweep
they
them?
did. They swept them, and that
Yes,
was yeah.
and that pretty much put the Yankees in the driver's seat, of that. And then Boston was able to make it up. The Yankees struggling there at the end against having to face Tampa, but you definitely there is going to be that environment's going to be insane. The Yankees and Red Sox environments are already insane, let alone if it's basically a Game 7 moment. It's going to be a win or go home game. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be interesting to see how each one of these pitchers live up to the moment because I don't think we've ever seen. You know, Evaldi had that big in the World Series where he pitched like the 18 innings. Cole pitched with the Astros some, but I don't think either one of them have ever been in a win or go home game. So it's going to be interesting to see how they
I
both
believe
react to it.
I believe Cole actually pitched the wild card game um, back when he was with the Pirates and they played the Cubs.
Yeah, I mean, he's a way different pitcher now though. So it's going to
Exactly.
be
So it's interesting to see he does
yeah
have experience
yeah.
in
So
that though.
I did forget he did pitch that game, but he's completely different than what he was then. Back in Pittsburgh. So it's gonna be insane for sure. And like I said,
Yeah.
in that rivalry already on top of this moment, it's gonna be insane.
Yeah,
So
and one last thing to look at there is they did line up Cole, but he has struggled badly in September, and he's dealt with a little bit of an injury. So it'll be very interesting to see how healthy he looks starting this game. And like you said, winner go home game. You never know what you might see out of the bullpens. You might see somebody come in and pitch. That's typically a part of the starting rotation. Chris Sale pitched on Sunday, but he didn't pitch but a couple innings. So, you might end up seeing like a Chris Sale pitch in this
yep,
game or something out of the bullpen. You just never know. So,
very well
definitely going to be
could,
an interesting game and a fun game to watch tomorrow night.
very much so. But let's go ahead and jump over to the National League Wild Card game, which will be taking place Wednesday. That's going to be between the Dodgers and the Cardinals. They've both lined up. They're pretty much aces. The Dodgers are going to have Max Scherzer going, and the Cardinals are going to have Adam Wainwright going.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Dodgers, I mean, you say they lined up their ace, but like they have four of them, so it's kind of hard not to line up one. But
Well, Kershaw
um,
got injured, so
that's right. Kershaw did get injured, and that could really affect them going forward later in the postseason. But I mean, you got a guy, in Scherzer who has so much experience pitching in big games like this that it'll be definitely interesting to see how he does. And then you look on the other side, and Adam Wainwright just had such a great resurgence this year at age. I think he's age 39, and we talked about him a lot. But it's going to be a very very interesting matchup. I think kind of the key to it is you look at the Dodgers, and they got to figure out. They got to figure out Wainwright because you said they haven't hit him all that well, have they?
no, they haven't hit him at all. And then another thing that to think of that we haven't mentioned yet, but that's that the Dodgers have lost Max Muncy as well. He got
Yes.
injured on a play at first base, and it's not looking good. It's a left elbow injury. They haven't exactly
Yeah.
said what it is, but
They,
they did say that it's highly unlikely that he's even available for the playoffs. So
yeah.
not just a wild card game, but even going forward. And he's been one of their their big time players in the postseason and one of their most consistent hitters this season. So that's going to be a big loss. They're going to have to try and figure out, is Bellinger or Pujols going to be playing first base there, and what it's just a big loss trying to figure out Wainwright and losing one of your big key bats there.
Yeah, can you imagine Albert Pujols facing the Cardinals in the
Yeah,
playoffs?
yeah.
I mean, in a winner take all game, that'd be pretty crazy. So I'm kind of pulling for that. I'm pulling for Albert Pujols to play first base in this game. Although I would kind of assume it'd be Bellinger, um, but yeah. So definitely an interesting game. I mean, I think pretty much everybody's gonna have their money on LA to take this game. But you never know. The Cardinals, since we've said they've been the hottest team in baseball recently. They've got a really experienced pitcher on the mound, and they're a team that is definitely looking, like they could potentially ruin a 106 win season in one game. So this is going to be a very very interesting game, and both of these games just look super entertaining for wild card matchups. You look at the Dodgers as a team that having to play this one game playoff as being the considered the best team in baseball year. Because they lost by one game to the Giants, and that's just such a big deal, and then that makes that game so intriguing. And then you look at the other end, and there's nothing like a elimination playoff game between the Red Sox and the Yankees in the postseason. So, and all these teams in this, with the maybe exception of the Cardinals, are real threats to win the World Series too, in my opinion. So, I think definitely going to be interesting, and I'm super excited to see the outcome in these two games in the next couple days, and then move on to the division series after that.
Yeah, so we'll come back on Wednesday night after the Dodgers and Cardinals game is over, and kind of do a recap of what happened in the wild card games, and then preview the rest of the series because those do start. The American League series division series start on Thursday, and then the National League division series start on Friday. So we will bring you guys another episode after the wild card games, and we'll make our postseason predictions in that episode, and figure that all out. I know. Sorry that this is such a long episode. We really wanted to be able to wrap the season up on the breakdown and not have to worry about coming back to it later, and just be able to focus on the postseason, and then going forward. We don't have to worry about looking back at all at these. So sorry for rambling on right here and making it speed up there in the middle of the episode, but we didn't want to make this too long. But we're still going to be looking at close to an hour and a half episode. So thank you guys for keeping with us.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
And like I said, we'll be back Wednesday. So for this episode of the Batfoot Podcast, we're signing off. Hope you guys enjoy the wild card games.